Hey, everybody. Welcome to another special edition of NWP's The Right Time, where writing teachers from across the nation get together to interview writers who produce children's and young adult books. My name is Brian Ripley Crandall. I'm the director of the Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody again today in the upstairs of my house, which is my office and my bedroom. Once again, the right time, we'll begin with a writing prompt, and we're going to hold 3 minutes for listeners to give writing a go. We hope these writing invitations spur the listeners to keep writing after each episode. The prompts are also designed for parents and young people who may be at home as well, and we hope that families will watch, read, and write together.
And I'm Tanya Baker. I'm the Director of National Programs at the National Writing Project, and I'm really excited to be co-hosting this series with Brian. Each week we have the honor and the pleasure to welcome our guests and our listeners and viewers. So we're very excited this week. I get to introduce Erika Sánchez. Erika is a poet, a feminist, and a cheerleader for young women everywhere. She was the sex and love advice columnist for Cosmopolitan for Latinas for 3 years, and her writing has appeared in Rolling Stone, Salon, and the Paris Review. Erika says she's always dreamed of writing complex, empowering stories about girls of color, what she wanted to read when she was a young adult. And as a fan, I'd say that she's achieved this with I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. I am pleased to know, among other things, that she and I share that we are cat people in this land of dog people. You can find out more about Erika at ericalsanchez.com or by following at Erika L. Sanchez on Twitter.
In contrast, I'm a dog person. I've always been a dog person. I love cats. I want cats. I would have cats, but my allergies does not allow them in my house. All right. I have the true honor of introducing Janelle Bence to the listening audience and to celebrate the National Writing Project community with this special teacher that I've admired for several years now. She's a 9th grade English facilitator in her 20th year of teaching in the state of Texas. She has experience with English language learners in both urban and suburban school districts. She's also been an extremely active National Writing Project teacher leader, where she has served on the board of directors for 3 years, has presented at many national and international conferences, AERA, Deeper Learning, NWP Annual Meeting, NCTE, AP, and the New Tech Annual Conference. She stays busy. And she's a mom, right? In 2018, Janelle was selected to receive the Outstanding Teaching of Humanities Award by Humanities Texas. Her passions are teaching, obviously, writing, civic engagement, amplifying learning voice, yoga, and creating all things sourdough, which I hope she'll expand on a little bit when she's talking. It's a true pleasure to turn the show over to Janelle and to Erika and have them introduce the writing prompt. Welcome. How are you all doing?
Hello.
Doing pretty well. My cat might make an appearance, just FYI.
Well, your cat can write too. So there are a lot of gorgeous moments in this book. And I just want to kind of go into one specific moment. There's a line in chapter 20 of I'm Not the Perfect Mexican Daughter where the main character, Julia, says, if I didn't write, I feel like I'm going to die. And many of us are writers who happen to teach writing and who share this feeling. So I invite all of you to write about a time when writing provided a catharsis or a healthy release, or write about a time when one of your students or one of your children wrote and that act provided a much needed release.
Now I'll set a timer and I'll let you know when 3 minutes are up.
3 minutes, here we go.
That's 3 minutes, Janelle.
That was a great prompt, and I'm going to actually put my writing on my blog tomorrow because I like where it's going. I'm handing the show back to you, Al.
That's wonderful. Awesome. Okay, so I'm now ready to partake in this beautiful discussion with Erika. Jumping from that wonderful line, I also noticed in that same chapter, Julia has been struggling throughout the book with her relationships with her parents. But she learns that her father was actually an artist, um, quite gifted in drawing. But before this discovery, Julia never really saw her father as this creative person. But from that discovery, Julia is able to see her father in a different light. And there seems to be an attempt for more connection and understanding. Can you tell us about how this revelation changes her relationship with him, and maybe how this has been part of your own experience, or what was the inspiration for that?
Sure. Well, growing up, my father was pretty silent, kind of distant. And so I always wondered about his life, his interiority, and how moving to this country changed him. Because he's very different when he's in Mexico. And I've seen it. It's very stark, the contrast. So I've always thought about that and why that is, and what people give up, migrate, and in order to put food on the table, literally. And how so many people have all these talents, but their circumstances don't allow them to flourish in that way. And so, so many people who are forced to migrate out of necessity because of poverty, I feel like often they have to leave behind so much, and not just their families, but also some of their dreams and some of their aspirations. And so I always wondered about that. And my dad is not an artist, but it's something that I imagined in this story. And I wanted Julia to have like this artistic connection to her father, and she attempts to talk to him about it. Unfortunately, he has been so disillusioned by life, by this country, that he no longer is interested in his artistic talents. And so I found that to be very heartbreaking. And I think it's a pretty common story where um, men and women who have these dreams are often forced to put them aside just to survive. And so I find that incredibly heartbreaking, being a person who has pursued her dream always, being a person who lives a life of a writer and who is very privileged. Like, I can't imagine having to give that up and just not doing that. And so that was the impetus for that discovery. And I think a lot of immigrant children, they just don't know a lot of what their parents have been through. And a lot of their parents protect them from that knowledge. And I think that's a form of love, right? And so when she goes to Mexico, she discovers all of these things. She's forced to like reckon with her parents as human beings and not just her parents.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You talk about, what her parents lost or gave up and sacrificed when they came here. And then they were so intentional and so set on sending Julia back to Mexico to give her that time to heal. And that's also where her heritage was, where she could find out more about. And that's when she was beginning to make these discoveries about her family. And I think that's great. Can you imagine a world where her father maybe didn't have to make those sacrifices, or if so many of us didn't have to give up our dreams? What do you think that world would look like? And instead we were like you.
Oh my God. Well, I feel incredibly lucky. So I feel like it'd be a very beautiful existence for everyone, to be able to cultivate your talent and your passion in life, rather than to suppress that and to just work for the sake of surviving. I feel like we live in this really harsh capitalist society where we're often not given that choice, especially people who come from working class backgrounds. Like, I mean, when I majored in poetry, everyone's like, what are you doing? And I mean, it was a pretty radical choice to say, I'm going to study literature, when I grew up quite poor and there was no guarantee that this was going to pay the bills. I had no idea how this was going to turn out. And so I just wish that everyone had that opportunity. I think about my grandmother and the women who came before her, and like none of them knew how to read or write. Like she to this day does not know how to read or write. And my whole life is writing and reading. And so like, how did that happen, and why did it take so long for that transition to occur? It's just, I think keeping people from literacy is a way to suppress them, to oppress them. And I just wish that we all had access to education, and we all had the ability to live a life that is motivated by beauty, by love, and not simply by just trying to find food to eat. It's just, it's such a sad way to have to live, and I really believe that we can do better than this.
So when you see young people, your readers, for example, struggling maybe with that same choice, what can you offer them to keep that focus and keep that, yes, you can go and work or whatever, but there's something about reading a book and, taking that time and building up those literacy skills, and also keeping focused on your dream like you did. What is your advice to them, to your readers?
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Sheer tenacity, I guess. I was really stubborn, and I felt like this is the only thing that I want to do. And so I feel like I didn't even have a choice. It was like this or nothing. And so for a long time I struggled. I worked all sorts of jobs that were completely irrelevant, most of which I hated. I was just very unhappy, and I was very bad at most of them as well. And so I knew in my heart that this was what I was meant to do. And so like, if you have that calling, like sometimes you do have to make those sacrifices, and it takes a long time often. Like I didn't publish my books until I was in my early 30s. And that felt to me a long time to wait for my dreams to start to happen. And so, I think really looking for support and, finding mentors, that's always been really critical for me, finding people who have been through it and can guide me. I don't know what I would have done without them, because I have all these questions, and I feel like no one in my family has done anything like this. So like, I didn't have that ability to go ask my mom, like, for advice, career advice. It just wasn't a possibility. So looking for people to uplift you, just making connections, creating a community. I think that's really helpful. And also being very patient, because it takes a very long time typically. I mean, there are some very young people who are very successful, but like I was not one of them. So I don't know what that's like.
Well, patience is hard for sure.
Yeah.
In the book, we also get these wonderful tastes, these tidbits of like poetry from Julia, that Julia writes. Sometimes I feel like, one of the reasons why Julia is deemed as imperfect or not perfect is because she has that dream, because she has that creative side, and because she really relies on writing and her literacy. I was wondering if the poems in the book, were they written for Julia to write, or were they seeds of something that you had already written, for yourself? Like, what is that crossover in the process? What is that?
Well, for me, poetry is the beginning of everything. That's how I fell in love with writing, and it continues to be the core of my life. And so I knew that poetry had to be incorporated into the book. And so I made her a poet. I was a poet. And some of the poetry, well, actually all of the poetry I took from my old journals, and I slightly revised, not much really.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And so, the poetry is very rough, but for a 15-year-old, it's okay. So it felt like very vulnerable to do that. But it's all from my old work.
That is keep those journals, boys and girls. Like, that's
for real. I still have them somewhere scattered.
It adds that layer of authenticity to Julia. I mean, that's why, she was such this angsty teenager that like I was like, well, it doesn't, I mean, it seems like she's there. Like I just could see my students, my child in this teenager. And so that makes a lot of sense that they were actually from your old journals. That's incredible.
Yeah,
That's really
thank
cool.
you.
Let's see. Okay. So there's this big tension in the book about, you know, not judging the book by its cover, but then also there are masks constantly throughout the book. Like Olga led this life that was completely different from what her parents, you know, thought she was leading, that made her the perfect daughter. And then there's even more discussion about, you know, sometimes the truth is not needed, that you just need to carry that. Talk to me about that notion of the masks and maybe being, you know, bicultural or crossing over to different cultures. What masks do we wear, and how can we navigate knowing when to be and where it's safe to be our authentic selves, and then when it's time to wear the mask?
Yeah, I think Julia struggles with the idea of having a mask. She doesn't want to have one, and that creates a lot of tension for her in her family, especially. She is very much an unusual child, especially in the context of her culture, and so she has a really hard time adjusting to what is expected of her. And you know, she dresses kind of weird. Her mom doesn't like her fashion, and in a way, it in itself, it's its own mask. She is very much calling attention to the fact that she's different. And so I think that's a very like teenage way of thinking, and I used to do it too. Like I wore all sorts of ridiculous outfits, in a sense to signify that I was like a weird kid, right? But underneath it all, she's also just like this very fragile person. And her sister appeared to be very puritanical, but she was not. And so we all do this. We perform, in a sense. And I think at the end of the book, she feels like she has to carry this secret, even though she's very much committed to being authentic and honest. She feels that this is her responsibility in order not to hurt her parents any further. So that's the choice that I made at the end, where I wasn't sure if she was going to tell them or not. And then at the end, I decided she wasn't. And I wanted to show that she grew as a person. She matured. And even though she's committed to the truth, she also understands that this would destroy her family, in a sense. And so she keeps that to herself. And I think that's really important. And some people don't quite understand why she makes that choice. But that's where I was coming from.
Right. So I agree. Julia is very complex. I was like, oh, okay, she has this going on. And you talk about you just mentioned her fragility. So, you know, she has all of these layers to her, and then slowly but surely her mental health comes into focus. With such a complex character, what does it look like when you're creating her, when you're trying to, you know, hint towards, you know, the questioning of her mental health, and doing it such a dignified way where it does just kind of slowly but surely, oh, okay, wait, here are the signs. What is your process of creating her? Like, is it brainstorming? Are there visuals? Is there a timeline? Like, what does that look like?
I think a lot of it was just based on my own personal experience. I mean, it's very much fiction, so most things in the book aren't literally true, but I myself struggled with mental illness as a teenager, and I still do as an adult. And so I know that experience very, very well. And I wanted the book to unfold in a way that was surprising but inevitable. And so I had little seeds throughout the book that kind of hinted at this unraveling that was going to happen. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand the way depression works. And a lot of the time people are just trying to hold it together and just trying to endure and survive while they're actually just like devastated inside. And so I wanted to show that she was really, really struggling to keep it all together, but ultimately it was too much. And her circumstances, also her brain chemistry, like she just couldn't do it. And although she is in many ways very fragile, she's also incredibly strong because, I mean, she goes through so much and she overcomes a lot. And so I wanted to show that complexity. I wanted her to be really complicated because I think most people are. And I didn't want a character that was one-dimensional because I wouldn't want to read that story. And so I wanted her to be funny, to be kind of mean at times, to also be kind, and to make mistakes. And she makes so many, and she doesn't know how to really cope with what she's going through because she doesn't have a lot of resources. And I think that's the case for a lot of kids.
Yeah, I think that you do an excellent job of not creating a character like, oh, how we think teenagers are or whatever, but really there's so much respect for her, even though we're like, oh, come on, you know, why are you saying that? Like as she has, I do feel like she's doing the same thing. Like, why did I just say that? Why am I acting like this? But we feel that with her. And there's just so much respect for her. So I hope, you know, that more of my kids, I'm just going to be like, pick this book up because this is like, we do respect you. We're trying to get to the heart of this, but this is a really great treatment of this teenager.
Yeah, I mean, she's frustrating. She frustrated me when I was writing her. You know? I think people miss the point sometimes, and they're like, oh, she's so unlikable. And it's like, well, I think it's more complicated than that. And also, why does she need to be likable? You know, like, why do we have that standard for young women? You know, and why can't she just be a complicated character? That to me is much more interesting.
Right. Well, even as adults, there's so many characters of people that don't even like themselves. So honestly, you know, you portray yourself like a lot of adults portray themselves as people that are not likable. So she's struggling with that same thing, just in this younger hormonal body. So
yeah, it's usually adults that don't like her, and it's usually white adults, and it's usually women. So I think that says something.
So in chapter 27, Julia states, I hate this feeling, the not knowing. These in-between places are scary. But then again, I understand that nothing is ever certain. I think that is, man, applicable in so many ways right now, but also for Julia, you know, thinking about, you know, starting that dream world that she wanted for so long, her goal. What advice do you have for us getting through these uncertain times? And yeah, feel free to come on, let's talk.
Okay, sure. Well, I think something that's very helpful to me is that I practice Buddhism, and I know, and I've come to terms with the fact that everything changes, for better or for worse. Sometimes we don't know. And so like really coming to terms with that idea that nothing is static is very liberating in a sense. It's also terrifying at the same time. So with what's going on now, like I'm really horrified by what's happening. I think our president is just unhinged, and I think he's dangerous, and I think that he has done so much damage. I mean, I could go on and on and on about how much I hate him, but I won't. I think that, I mean, a lot of what he's done is really terrifying to me. And a lot of like what's happening with like the rioting and the police brutality, I think we're coming to a head, and things are starting to come to the surface, and we can't continue as we were. We just can't. It's not sustainable. And so I think that this is a chance, and this is me being very idealist and hopeful, that this is a chance to kind of recalibrate and to really understand what's important. What does it mean to be a society? What does it mean to be a human being? What do we actually care about? And so for me, it's making me even more radical than I already was. And I'm hoping that people who have been kind of oblivious to what's been happening are starting to understand that, you know, white supremacy is just ruining our society, and it has been. And so, like, what can we do about it, and how can we change, and how can we prioritize, you know, the well-being of people after we've survived this. So I don't know. I mean, I have good days and bad, but I really think that we're starting to reflect on like what we want as a culture. And so I think that, you know, making changes in whatever way that we can right now is really important. You know, voicing our opinions, writing, creating art, protesting, whatever you want. I think it's a really important time to just push back against all the things that have been harming us as a people.
And I think that what great timing, because I think that now when we are isolated in this time that's a little bit slower, we've been in the same spot, it gives us that time to be quiet and reflect and say, what is important? What do I value in my family? What do I value in my country? What do I value, you know, for this society, and really planning on what and acting on what is important. So
yeah, it's a really critical time for us all, and like we don't know what's gonna come, but we can try to dictate what's gonna come in our own ways. And I hope that we all just figure out that we're all human beings and we're equal, and we need to treat each other with respect. And I mean, it sounds so basic, but I feel like a lot of people don't see that. And it's just really unsettling to see so many Black people killed like unnecessarily. I mean, like what is happening right now? You know, like
yeah,
during a pandemic, you know, it's just
right.
like, oh my goodness, is mind-boggling. I'm just trying to make sense of it all, and I don't have a lot of answers, honestly.
Right. And I think that that's okay not to have the answers, but rather, you know, putting in our own context helps, you know,
Yeah,
helps to clarify what our next step is, or clarify how we live and breathe, because it's ultimately our choices, right? Our own choices that will make the big change.
right.
So
And we also need to think of how like we contribute to
yeah,
the problem, you know, and like
yeah, absolutely.
we're not all blameless, you know. I'm mad, but I think about like all the anti-Blackness in the Latino community and like what I can do about that, and like that's really upsetting. And so yeah, there's just so much there's a lot to think about right now.
Well, I'm ready
Yeah.
for it to happen, for sure. I could continue talking to you forever probably, but I don't know if everyone will enjoy that. So it actually is, believe it or not. Unless, Erika, do you have a question?
I don't. This was great.
Yeah,
I was in a
it
terrible
happened.
mood earlier, so this
Oh,
really lightened my just demeanor. So thank you.
yeah. I just taught a yoga class, and it was all about like waking up, and then in the end, I was like, or maybe woke. So they're like, you can be, but there are times when you got to wake up and be like, ooh, you know, let's go.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
find you very re-energizing. So
Thank
thank
you.
you. I just want to take one last opportunity to it's time, right? To write out? Okay. So we're going to write out this session. And we entered our talk today by discussing how writing provides us with support in a time of struggle. But now, through Erika's writing, we also understand that our imperfections, our challenges, make us uniquely strong and prepared for our journey. So now let's take a few moments to embrace writing about an obstacle, or write a celebration of your growth and learning because of that obstacle.
As I'm muted, you couldn't hear that timer go off. But now I'm not muted, and that's 3 minutes.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tanya, I was sitting here thinking, Janelle, Erika, thank you so much for being here today, and how lucky we are to have this conversation at this time. I was simply in awe of what you were talking about. And then I realized, Tanya, it is so difficult to be at home and on mute and not join the conversation and ask questions and
It was really hard.
It was very difficult, but I took notes, and I decided I'm just going to save it for my journals and carry on. It's the right time to do that. And I love that, like, everything does change and we don't know what's coming up tomorrow. We can't continue as we were. I keep saying, I don't want to return to normal. I want to return to better. And I like that, the idea of recalibrating and figuring out a way to redefine what we mean by society, and more importantly, what it means to be a human being. So thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add my thanks as well. I know, Brian, I feel like I should put a recorder. I should have had a recorder on just my responses to everything that was being said in the interview. Erika, what a joy to be able to talk with you about your work and the work you're doing in the world as well. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate you're putting books out in the world that you wanted as a young person for all the young people today. Like, we can't thank, as teachers, we can't thank you enough for adding to the complex and important voices in the world and available to young people.
Well, that means a lot to me. Thank you.
And Janelle, it's always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you for being willing to do this interview today and representing the network in such a great way. And I have to thank listeners too. If you are new to the Writing Project but would like to connect with us, please follow our Facebook page and or join our Facebook community, particularly if you are an educator interested in talking with other educators. And go to nwp.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, which is called Right Now, and be informed about upcoming events and opportunities like this amazing interview. Thank you, everyone. I just would like to end with that.